Now here's one of my favourite poems actually by Betjeman, Lenten Thoughts of a High Anglican. So it's again one of his churchy poems, but we're kind of moving into another area of his poems as well, which is about relationships, and also, you know, there's a degree of Betjeman making fun of himself here, being very self-deprecatory, because he's making fun of the fact that he's not really doing what he should be doing in church. So let's have a look at the title, Lenten Thoughts of a High Anglican. Well, that conjures up certain ideas. Lent's a time of simplicity and penance and discipline and sacrifice. So we're led to believe that this poem's going to be really very different to what it actually is. Lenten Thoughts of a High Anglican, well, that might be somebody who's very proper and quite traditional in their worship. So, and of course the exact opposite happens. So the title, we expect something completely different, and so it's a comic device of inversion. It subverts our expectations. We know also that this poem is based on an autobiographical experience. It says so at the bottom of the page. It says, "This is about a lady I see on Sunday mornings in a London church." So it's based on autobiographical experience, this idea of forbidden love, extramarital desire, the joy of sexual excitement as a means of escaping from kind of the routine of married life and all the respectability that that brings about. So Betjeman is perhaps his conscience here is struggling with infidelity. Isn't she lovely, the mistress, with her wide apart grey-green eyes, the droop of her lips, and when she smiles, her glance of amused surprise? So immediately I noticed the rhythm there, which is anapaestic, and it's quite jaunty, and light-hearted, creating a very light-hearted, jaunty tone, which is not really kind of what we'd expect from a high Anglican in church during Lent. And perhaps it may be, you know, that kind of rather jaunty rhythm mirrors his the fact that he's rather sexually excited by this figure in church. How nonchalantly she wears her clothes, how expensive they are as well, and the sound of her voice is as soft and deep as the Christ Church tenor bell. So, of course, bells ring out to kind of call congregations to church, and the fact that her voice is likened to a church tenor bell kind of implies that, you know, it's her that draws him to church. There's lots of religious imagery here. Her voice is likened to the church bell, and we'll develop that later on, that it's kind of her that he worships. Anyway, she's wonderfully elegant, casually confident, and she's got this fabulously alluring voice. The sound of her voice is soft and deep. Moving on to the third verse, I'll just move that up a bit. Moving on to the third verse. But why do I call her mistress? Who know not her way of life? Because she has more of a cared-for air than many a legal wife. Well, why does he call her mistress? Perhaps it's his imagination. Perhaps he'd like her to be his mistress. She's, again, you know, she's sort of very smartly dressed. She's got this cared-for air. as opposed to, well, I guess he's implying that a lot of wives go around looking like a bag of rags, perhaps. So moving on to the fourth verse, how elegantly she swings along in the vapoury incense veil. Of course, the incense normally in a high church is swung down the aisle. And she is associated with that incense. She's shrouded in a mist of incense, very enigmatic, mysterious figure. And again, she's associated with, of course, incense is supposed to be our prayers going up to heaven. And again, she is very much associated with that incense as well. So she is the object of his worship, not God. The angel choir must pause in song when she kneels at the altar rail. So he imagines that even the choir will be temporarily silenced by her beauty. So it's moving on to the fourth verse. I'll just move this up a little bit. Okay, moving on to the 2, 3, 4, fifth verse. The parson said that we shouldn't stare around when we come to church, or the unknown God we are seeking may forever elude our search. So he defies the parson. He doesn't do what the parson expects him to. And he is looking around in church. He's just looking at her. And it's quite interesting, this phrase, unknown God, the unknown God we are seeking. So he describes the Almighty as an unknown God, someone that's kind of removed from him, inaccessible, unknown. And we get the impression that he's not, he doesn't have a relationship with God at the moment. It seems very different to some of the other poems that we've read on the subject of church and religion. Let's have a look at the last verse. But I hope the preacher will not think it unorthodox and odd if I add that I glimpse in the mistress a hint of the unknown God. So what he's doing here, it feels almost sacrilegious in that he sees, there's a glimpse, he gets more of a kind of a glimpse of God through looking at her than he does just being in church. So he subverts our expectations. This high Anglican is unorthodox, he uses the word unorthodox, because he's thinking about sex rather than penance at Lent. So, and it's her, she offers him a kind of a metaphysical experience. She inspires him. And he seems to worship her in place of God. So what Benjamin is doing in this poem is he is upturning our the usual order of things. The speaker's thoughts in this dramatic monologue, the speaker's thoughts are opposite to what they should be. So there's a kind of a sense of, subversion here, or comic inversion. So the comedy really comes from the fact that the holiness of the Lent period is undercut by Benjamin's fantasies about this woman. It's subversive. It's not very religious at all. So given the title, Lenten Thoughts of a High Anglican, nothing of the sort. And that's where the humour lies in this poem. It's an ironic title which subverts our expectations, and instead of worshipping God, he worships the mistress. He sees more to be inspired by in her than in God.